This is Talk Time. With the future not looking so bright for oil prices, the Nigerian government is looking at making agriculture the mainstay of the economy. At the 8th Bola Tinubu colloquium, which took place Tuesday, President Muhammadu Buhari stated that his government was working to make the country sufficient in the production of rice, wheat and other crops.
In subsidy.
Well, in the studio to discuss agriculture and how best Nigeria should handle it is an agriculturist, Prince Wale Oyekoya.
Good morning.
Good morning. And joining me via Skype is agriculture consultant Kola Masha. Good morning to you and thanks for joining us. Well, both of you gentlemen, I'd rather just stick with a simple word that describes you as farmers.
Definitely.
I think that will do.
Definitely.
Really for the purpose of this discussion. Now, let's start even by, putting some maybe figure to it. In the 60s, agriculture was the most important contributor to domestic production in Nigeria, employment and forex earnings. Now, let me just start by asking how we can get back to that place where in the 60s, agriculture alone contributed to about 45% of the GDP. I mean, that's
almost about
massive.
50%.
Almost 50%.
Yes. Where the president has spoken, and has spoken well. Now it's left for the citizens to embrace what the president have rather said. And this is what we've been talking about for the past 10 years, because when you forecast what is going to happen to the nation, I believe our leaders should be able to listen to people that listen. This oil will not last long, and that is exactly what is happening. So the president has spoken very well, and I could say he's speaking the mind of farmers. But the problems still remain. And I keep on telling people now that the door is open for agriculture, you are going to be seeing a lot of emergency farmers. And what I mean by that is that people that has no business in farming will be coming up because they feel that there's a money coming up, and by the time money comes from the federal government, before it get to the real farmers, it's going to get to these emergency farmers, which farmers call political farmers.
Okay.
And I hope the president is not making a political statement. What I mean by this is that all the reform we'll be having now is on the federal level, but we are ignoring the most aspect of it, which is the local government and the states. In the olden days, just like what you said in the 60s, yes, we have no business with the oil, and the country is doing very well. So when the oil came, the oil boom became oil doom as of today. Yes, agriculture contributes more than 50% of our GDP, then almost about 70% of employment then. But if you look at the trend now, the services sector is taking over from agri sectors. And what I mean by this is that the states really need to come up with their own agenda that listing. If you look in the olden days, every state can be identified with 2 or 3 items of these crops that can be grown in every state in Nigeria, including Abuja. Even Abuja, they are best in producing potatoes and yam.
Wow.
And that is the state capital. So every state in Nigeria, believe me honestly, can identify 2 or 3 items that can be grown in each state, and this will create employment and food security for the states.
Wale Oyekoya, 33 states, just like you said earlier, that every state has 2 or 3,
Advantage.
Yes.
Product that
it can
grown.
actually. I mean, listening to the Kebbi State governor the other day during the 8th colloquium of Bola Tinubu, he actually said 33 states in Nigeria, out of 36, can actually produce rice in commercial quantity. I mean, that's amazing.
Sure. Yes, as I said, if the political will is there, it's possible. But now I cannot say the political will is not there when our number 1 citizen, who happen to be the president of the country, has the interest, because the man mean well for this country.
And he has been drumming this.
He has been drumming from the day when even before he came to power. So I think it is now for us to embrace what this man is doing. He cannot do it alone. Sometimes I pity this man. He's trying to put all his effort to the development of this nation. But there are some people that are going to be pulling him back. And these are people I call emergency political farmers. And notwithstanding what we are talking about here, our youths are there to embrace agriculture. But there are so many things need to be put in place, like the infrastructure from the government anyway, because there's nothing we can do without the government interventions. But the state governments, you can look at it that about 27 states cannot pay their salary. To me, it's a shame on the CEO of all those states. When we have so many abundant land that you can put your people into farming, not just farming, go into processing, not just processing, go into marketing, not just marketing, go into distribution, not just distribution, we can export. So what is all these so-called CEO called governors are doing why they cannot pay the salaries of their staff?
Now, when you
So what is all these so-called CEO called governors are doing why they cannot pay the salaries of their staff?
Now, when you talk about government role in, putting agriculture where it should be, the 60s that we refer to, or even way before that,
Yes.
how much of government intervention or government input did we have that, everywhere you looked, there was a farmer,
Definitely.
whether at subsistent level or not?
You are right, but input were given them. You have to remember, the federal government are giving inputs to the farmers, and lands were available then. If you look at most of the lands we have today, is in the hands of communities or big people. That real farmers, 80% of farmers reside in the rural areas, and especially in the north. And you have to remember that in the north, women does not have the right to a land. And this trend needs to be changed because 60% of the rural farmers are women. But if they don't have the right to have a land, it's a big problem. And what are the governments doing to even empower and encourage these women and the people in the rural area? These are where the state comes in. These are where the local governments comes in. It has always been my own idea that, listen, farmer does not need all these billions that they are talking about. What farmers really need is improved seed, fertilizers, insecticides, and at the same time, let the government buy back some of this farm produce. That way the farmer can go back to the farm. Once that produce is bought from them, then what happens? You bring in private sectors to start the production and processing. After processing, what is next? To market it. So it's a very simple ideology, but if the government does not call all the stakeholders together, I'm talking of real farmers that are really practicing farming, we keep on dancing and dancing and dancing. Look at what happened in the past during the Operation Feed the Nation. The Obasanjo spoke well. What happened after he left? He went down the drain.
Yes, we've had the Operation Feed the Nation.
During the Green Revolution, what happened? After Shagari left, everything go down the drain. The same thing, agricultural transformation agenda. If care is not taken, if political people hijack this thing, it's going to be the same thing. So we really need to come to the round table that what is the problem? We don't need all this billion. Yes, don't get me wrong. We need the money, but it could be used in a wise way. Instead of giving the real cash to farmers, give them improved seed and fertilizers.
When you talk about not allowing it to be hijacked
Yes.
politically and all that,
Yes.
I mean, shouldn't it just be a case of, look, the more the merrier, let as many people come into the sector, and then maybe later, like they say, water will find its level.
It's not.
I mean, shouldn't
it's not easy.
every sector, everybody, every person, man or woman, young and old, be encouraged to take up agriculture as a source of livelihood?
You are right about that, but agriculture is about passion. And
Indeed.
it takes time. Agriculture is not a quick fix like other sectors. It takes time. So what I mean that the political people will not hijack is that there are so many farmers that have already gone out of business. You know why? Because they are competing with all these cheap products coming from abroad. And if you look at it, that 80% of the food we eat today, if not for the new president we have, Buhari, it would have been very worse. That 80% of the food we eat are being imported to this country. And these are like jobs that we're exporting out, importing other people's job into our own country. Because any country that produce things for us, definitely they're enhancing their own growth. They are creating employment there, and their own GDP is increasing. While our own is the other way around. So the president have done the right thing. That is why I'm very happy the way the forest is going. Why do we have to depend on dollars? We spend naira. I've gone to so many functions that you see some of these political leaders, or let me put it this way, they are spending dollars as if we are, as if we spend dollars in our country. So this trend needs to be stopped. So the president have seen it all. He knows the weakness of our people that listen. It's because you people see dollar. That's why you're importing toothpick. That's why you're importing tomato paste. That's why you're importing chicken. That's why you're importing rice. But by the time I close the door, we'll be able to find our root in this country.
Let's even break it down. When we're talking about agriculture, the first thing that comes to mind is, crops. Well, there's a lot more to agriculture than just food crops, livestock, fisheries, and all of that. Recently, I heard that Nigeria actually exports about 250,000 goats alone to the Middle East, or is it Saudi Arabia?
Yes,
I think one of those, which
East.
means there's a great potential there. And the issue of funding seems to be, before we even talk about that, the Maputo Declaration says that 10% of the budget should be devoted to agriculture. Are we even living up to that?
No, we have not even got to 2%. I've been talking about this thing for the past 3 years, even during the last administration that are listening to me. Where is the 10%? Even the current one we're having is less than 2%. Even the states have not even met up the obligations. And this is the only place where we can get a whole volume of money coming into the sectors by exporting what we have. So we have no business. Just like our president have rather said that, why do we have to import what we can grow in the country? It's wrong. So let everybody go back. Agriculture is our culture. That's why we call it agriculture. Let us go back to the roots. During the Granite Pyramids, if you look at most of the western region, it's being built by the agricultural money. During the cocoa and the rubber plantation cutting, come on, we can still go back to this if we can reduce our high taste of importations.
Okay, let me bring in Kola Masha right now on the phone to speak with us on this all-important issue of agriculture. How can we make agric our culture again? Of course, you were trying to make a point before we lost contact with you. But let me ask you the same question I asked my guest in the studio, Wale Oyekoya. The issue of the Maputo Declaration that actually says that 10% of the national budget should be dedicated to agriculture. Now that we're talking about making agriculture the mainstay of our economy, how likely is this to be if we're not even anywhere near 10%?
Well, I think as my colleague mentioned, the reality is that we are way underspending that. I think currently over the last 20 years we've ranged between 2 and 4%. But the real question is not so much how much we're spending, but what we are spending. Are we spending that appropriately? The reality is that traditionally government spend has been focused on subsidizing inputs, which fundamentally is actually the wrong approach. Because the reality is that what government should be doing is leveraging their investment to stimulate other private sector actors to come into the sector. The reality is by government subsidizing inputs such as fertilizer and so on and so on and so forth, they're actually crowding out the private sector. Because how can the private sector actor compete in a value chain where the government product is typically anywhere from 50 to 60% less? Imagine if government was subsidizing Coke. Would you buy regular Coke, or would you buy the Coke that there's a few bottles of Coke that are half the price, but they're not available to everybody? So fundamentally, that's the key challenge. The reality is the government needs to focus on the fundamental things that will enable the sector to increase its productivity so that we can actually compete with imported products. Because the reality, an outright ban on imported products fundamentally will just increase the cost of food for the average Nigerian. Because reality, Nigerian production is very uncompetitive. What we need to do is figure out how to make Nigerian production competitive. Government needs to implement things such as getting farmers access to credit to buy the quantity and quality of inputs they need. They need to focus on getting farmers access to high quality inputs, say for example, seed. The reality is seed at the end of the day is the most important thing that a farmer needs. Today in Nigeria, the varieties of seed that are available to farmers are anywhere from 10 to 15 years old. Imagine if you're using a computer that's 10 to 15 years old. How productive would you be?
Wow.
So, the government actually has policies in place discouraging technology to come into the country, discouraging technology to be available for farmers that can dramatically improve their productivity. Those are the fundamental things that the government needs to focus on.
Let me take you up on the quality of seeds that you talk about. I know that during the last administration of Goodluck Jonathan, there was this GES introduced, growth enhancement scheme. How successful was that?
The reality, again, is that those programs that are focused primarily on providing what's called input subsidies, in theory, they can work. But the reality is what you find often in these types of programs is you find it's too much of an incentive for bad actors to take advantage. The reality is that often what you would find is what's considered round tripping, where government would deliver, supply would deliver fertilizer to the government, farmers would pick it up, supply would buy that back at a subsidized price from the farmers, and then resupply the same fertilizer back to government. And so the reality is those systems, unfortunately, have not worked. And the reality is the government needs to think creatively, particularly this government, around ways that they can invest that actually leverage other actors to come in and increase the level of investment. I think a prime example is what they've done in the seed space to a certain degree. So they reduced the time period that companies could come in and get test seeds and get them certified for availability in Nigeria. So before it used to take anywhere from 4 to 5, sometimes I think as many as 6, 7 years. Now companies have been able to work with the government to reduce that to anywhere from 1 to 2 years. So that way we can get new varieties released faster. Nigeria, the reality is we're lucky, we release maybe 2, 3, 4 varieties a year. Kenya and South Africa, particularly South Africa, releases like 70 to 80 new varieties every year. And so now the next challenge that we're facing, though, is the reality is the government is mandating that these seed companies have to produce these seeds in the country from day one. This is really a non-starter because the level of investment to do that for an uncertain market is really actually quite high. And the analogy we use is basically imagine where we would be if the government said to the telcos, you can come in and invest in Nigeria, but you have to build all your technology on your towers in Nigeria from day one. The reality, we'd all be using Nitel today. So there needs to be a process where they encourage these companies to backward integrate, but let's allow importation of some of this technology so farmers can get access to it, increase their productivity, and at the end of the day, we will now be able to have a much more vibrant agriculture sector.
Okay, let me come back to my guest in the studio. He's talked about, a situation where subsidization actually chases the private sector that should be driving, agriculture in this country away. That is one. And then he talks about, us importing, some components, including technology. Yes, nothing wrong with that. Should we be importing seeds? And then, of course, there's the issue of importation of grass that's been, a subject of debate, lately. When we import the very foundation, what can we place on that in such a way that we can own, agriculture?
To be honest with you, all these things breed corruptions. And sometimes I sit down and I say, where is all our R&D, research and development? In the 60s, we have our own seed. Even Malaysia came to Nigeria to take our own seed of oil. Today, they are the largest producer and the largest exporter of this oil.
Of palm oil in the world.
We didn't go to anywhere. So why do we have to be spending money on technology, on something that we can develop? We have so many good people in this country. This is a very great country. We need to develop our country, and we have to believe in what we have, and we have to believe in Nigerian products that buy Nigerian goods and shun dollars. Because if we can be able to be proud of what we produce, of what we can do within ourselves, we have so many youth that are very good in technology, my sister. Develop them. This is what they call capacity building. Develop these young youths that they have nothing to do, or what they do. That's why when they have nowhere to pour this knowledge, what do? They go into 419s. But the government is not tapping their knowledge. I don't believe that we should be buying technology when we have so many capable and able-bodied young men that can do this. To me, corruptions have taken a whole lot of all our sectors. And the president have seen this. Look at what happened during the budget padding. The man have done all his homework, but look what happened at the last minute. The same thing with this Greek development we are talking about, that if care is not taken, the main problem we're having are the civil servants. That is, you know, I made a statement that we are going to be having emergency farmers today because the president will not go out to the field. The minister will not go out on the field and see how this thing is being worked out. It's the civil servant that have to do it. I'll give an example of Lagos State. The governor of Lagos is trying all his possible best to improve food security in the state. But the people working by him are the ones that are sabotaging him. Let me be very honest speaking. For the Lekki International Airport.
Okay.
For the past 3 years up to this moment, we have not been able to lay a hand on our own farm to start farming for the past 3 years. Now tell me, the governor already approved that give these people their land, we took their land, we have to relocate them. Up to this moment, about 30 farmers have been displaced. So these are what I'm talking about, that the political will has to be there, and the president, which is the CEO or the commander-in-chief, and the governors, which happen to be the CEO, they really need to go out and inspect some of these projects, not just saying that, oh yes, we already earmarked this money for so. Our civil servants are the problem of our nation. Let us be honest. That is why the president changed all the permanent secretaries when he came in. See what still happened. They still come to the behind. They have seen that place as their own place, that nobody can come and terrorize us.